So good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to see some of you today. I'm glad that so many of you could join us. This is going to be one of two consecutive panels back to back, which are going to be led and hosted by the Office of Research Administration in the college. And today, what we thought would be really helpful is to hear from some of our colleagues about their strategies for hiring and building their research teams. I think for many of us, this is critical to our success. I know that, as many of you know, Jackie Spitzer works very closely with me and has been instrumental to my productivity over the last decade, both when I was at the University of Pennsylvania and now. And working with her has always underscored the value of me of, having talented and dedicated people as parts of our team. And so what we've done is we've assembled a number of our faculty members to join us across our different departments, which also makes this one of my favorite sessions, because I sometimes think we don't have as much opportunity as we would like to draw on the expertise of one another and learn from one another. So it's always great to have a panel of our faculty together. The last thing I will just point out is that we all agreed before we came on that June Park has certainly won the day in terms of perhaps one of the best backgrounds yet. And I think we all need to follow his lead and take pictures of our research teams and use that in our labs and use that as our backgrounds going forward. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Carol Tajian, who's a member of the post-award team in the Office of Research Administration, who's going to lead us through this discussion with our faculty. Carol?
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar, and thank you especially to Nadine Martin, June Park, Edwin Moss, and Beth Pfeiffer for presenting. I'm the Associate Director for Research Administration, and facilitating the hire or appointment of research personnel on grants and startup accounts falls under our department purview, and we can and will guide you on administrative policy and process. But we can advise you about what it means to hire, say, a postdoctoral fellow instead of a staff research scientist, or how that might play out in your lab. So Nadine, June, Edwin, and Beth have each staffed their labs in a variety of ways, and they're here to share their wisdom and answer your questions. So to that end, please use the question and answer function at the bottom of the screen freely to send questions throughout the presentation. I'll be reading through the questions at the end after everyone's completed their presentations, then we'll go through the questions and have a fun discussion. I look forward to a lively session, so let's get started. Nadine.
Sure. Hi, I'm Nadine Martin, and I'm the director of the Aphasia Rehabilitation Research Laboratory that's in the Saffron Center, and I'm in the Communication Sciences Department. So my area of research is in language and communication abilities of people who have had strokes and as a consequence have what we call aphasia, which is language impairment due to the stroke. I won't talk about that, but I've been at this for a long time, so I have actually a lot of information to impart based on successful moves on my part in terms of hiring and some unsuccessful. So I've certainly learned along the way. So I thought I would just start by talking about, and I'll try to keep this brief, but I do have, my knowledge about hiring has changed over the years. I've gotten wiser for sure. But certainly in the early stages of my career, I thought then, and I still believe now, it's important if you have the financial support to hire a full-time research assistant, not a student, but an employee, someone who might be a postbac, for example. So certainly you want someone that is has an interest in generally in what you're doing. But the full-time employee would then be available to supervise volunteers in your lab. Undergrad volunteers are great. They're wonderful. They're very enthusiastic, and their eyes are open, like they're just excited about everything you're doing because it's all new to them, and they work hard, but they do need to be supervised. So it will be you who is supervising them. And if you don't have the time to do that, you want to devote your time to getting more grants and completing your experiments and so on. It's definitely important to have an employee who's invested in working for you. That is something that I recognized early on and maybe from my mentors. and learn to apply. And so I mentioned undergrad RAs, volunteers are great if you have money to support them. The way I would do it is hire somebody first as a volunteer and see how they work, see how they are they really excited about what you do? And then, and do they work hard? And maybe after a semester, you might provide them with an undergraduate, some financial support if you can afford that. So, but they tend to be really very good workers anyway. Then when you get into the graduate level, in our department, we have a large clinical program. So the master's level students, they're very enthusiastic about being involved in research. In the first year, they're able to do that. But then when they get to the second year, it's harder for them to find the time to devote to any work in your lab. Because they're all out on clinical placements and so forth. But still, that said, some of them who are really, at that point, they really know more about communication sciences. And if they're in your lab, they're probably really interested in what you're doing in particular. So there might be a few gems in there, even at the second year graduate level, who want to do a thesis or just want to work in your lab, and they are willing to put in the extra time to do that. So generally with master's level students, I've found that they do well in the first year, and then it's not for wanting, not wanting to, but they have a harder time keeping up with you in the second year. Other people at the graduate level, then you get into the pre-docs versus the postdocs. And I think it's good to have a sprinkling of both in your lab. You will be doing different kinds of mentoring with each of these. And with the pre-docs, you're going to be teaching as well as helping them through the whole process of learning their craft, and they will help you with the writing. They will also participate in a lot of experiments in the lab as well as develop their own research. You'll be putting a lot of more effort into mentoring them and teaching them. With the postdocs, it's a different kind of mentoring. They're advanced, they're ready. You're helping them along with their career as well as getting their feet wet in the world of research and academics. And they help you out in a different kind of way, where they do a lot more writing. It's important for them to get publications, so they help you get the publications out as well. So it's important to have both, I think, a mixture of those in your lab. And of course, this means you need the financial support to do this. And but hopefully along the way, you've gotten more grants and so forth because you have organized your lab correctly and to the best of its ability to help you get to continue your research. I just wanted to say the last thing. At this point, I do have a lot of activity in my lab. I have a couple of grants. And I will say that my administrative duties have increased considerably because I'm managing a lot of people. And so you have to really keep up with that. And I think at my stage, for 2 projects, I have hired project managers. So this is a full-time person who's not just a research assistant, and is not a colleague who is an investigator like me. We have those as well, of course. But a project manager, their job is to manage your project. And maybe you were referring to this, David, when you mentioned the person in your lab who's helping you out so much. I don't know, but it's made all the difference in the world to me. I've been able to write more grants. I've been able to focus more on that. And you really need someone under you, not just manage the hiring, the mundane stuff, but to manage the people in your lab and to know what you're doing. So they're involved in as much in your research as you are, but they're arranging the meetings and the notices that go out to people and all the stuff that you used to do yourself, but you don't have the time to do anymore. So I'm going to stop there. I might have forgotten something, but I want to leave room for Edwin and other people to talk about their experiences. But this is someone who's been at it for a long time from me, and I have learned a lot along the way. So, thank you.
Hi, so I think it's my turn now. So my name is June Park. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology. And I'm running translational exercise biology lab Our research has two separate ongoing projects now. One is to study the molecular basis of vascular adaptation to exercise. So our targets patients are hypertension, and we are just trying to better understand that how exercise improve their vascular reactivity and improve their vascular function and ultimately reduce the high blood pressure. And the second project that we are conducting now in the lab is about the vasculature, but not in the peripheral, but in the brain. So it is a study about the cerebral vasculature. So we're specifically looking at the endothelial cells within blood-brain barrier as the potential, the target to find the biomarker for traumatic brain injury. So basically what we do is this is a human study. So with concussion or concussed athletes or with laboratory-based repetitive subconcussive head insert, we are collecting blood samples and analyzing the proteins in the circulating blood to identify a novel biomarker to give some help and guidelines for physicians and athletic trainers how severe that traumatic brain injury is, and also when they can return to the play. So that's twofold of my research interest and ongoing research. My research lab consists of the various levels of the training stage individuals. So in the picture, hopefully I look the youngest out of them. And actually in the all the way back, hanging on our lab t-shirts are the two undergraduate students. On the right, the Malik, she has been supported by NIH undergraduate STAR, U-STAR program. Actually the PI for the U-STAR program contacted me, I think through the consulting with our college leadership. So he contacted me and that's how I met him. And he is preparing for medical school. On the left of the t-shirts, she is another undergraduate student. He's been supported by Barry Goldwater Scholarship that's been given for the STEM area undergraduate students. And then yesterday in our individual meeting, he just gave me a really fantastic news that he just got accepted for MD PhD program at Yale. So he's been great, and actually it was really rewarding working with them. And basically I'm just trying to give them an opportunity that they can think and they can play in the sandbox in my lab and in the guidance of the senior individuals, including myself, and trying to motivate their research thinking and critical thinking for their term abstract presentation in scientific meeting at undergraduate levels. And I have now 3 doctoral students. And actually one of them is not there. As you can see, they're unmasked. That means it's before COVID. That picture was taken in, I think, fall in 2019. It's already almost 1.5 years ago. So those 3 doctoral students, they are all in a different stage. One have dissertation proposal on coming Monday, and the other students just passed the comprehensive exam last semester. And the 3rd doctoral student just joined my lab in last fall. For doctoral students, I usually have applications and being contacted by them by email initially about a year before the application deadline. There are absolutely other doctoral applications that went through the college, but since my research is more of like non-traditional exercise physiology research, I usually, have more toward the applicants who has a specific interest in my research program. So that's the usual way that I accepted the doctoral students who just first contacted me with certain interest, specific interest and knowledge base. And now there are the positions are empty now. There's a pre-transitioning one, just have a FMLA and move on to different institutes. There are two postdocs in the picture, one in front of t-shirts, one with the white shirts, the Suyang Choi. Actually, I have one postdoc who is the first postdoc position in my lab. Actually, he's like zero experience in postdoc. He had PhD in Japan and contacted by email and back and forth of interviews and conversations. I accepted that. And the other postdoc is more senior, having had 5 years of previous postdoc experience at Penn. And she joined Temple in my lab as a research associate. It's a senior postdoc level. So their role in my lab is usually they have their own projects that is related to the main project, or sometimes they have their own postdoctoral fellowship grant from, so Junchur has one from American Heart Association. So basically, first 2 year, just having them train more, spend more time working together, but going toward the third and fourth year and later, they kind of would be more semi-independent or independently work. And also they teach each other, they learn each other. I think in the lab composition in this biological science, they learn more from their peers than the PI, like me. And because there are a lot of like technical tips and empirical results. I have done that, it didn't work. So try something else, something like that save their time. And also I just encourage them to interact with undergraduate students as their personal like a training experience in the lab settings. And also the undergraduate student also exposed to, okay, so what is the after PhD, and the PhD student also learn from them indirectly. But basically we work together as a teamwork in different projects. And actually they just learn and teach each other. And there are the lab technician in front of the picture. She's been interestingly, she came to my lab when she was junior at Temple. She majored in the neuroscience, as undergraduate intern, the student worker. She just reached out and I was looking for a person. And now she's been in my lab for 6 years since undergraduate through post-baccalaureate experience. So she is now the person who most know about what we're doing. So now she's working primarily as a lab manager. So basically she is taking care of inventories and orderings and receiving package and stored in the right place. And also helping me through that research compliance documents like renewals and ILB, ICOOK, and or IBC related documentation. So, and also there are chemical inventory we have to update every year. So entire list of like hundreds different bottles of chemicals. She basically updated and checked for the expiration of those each bottles and discard them properly. So that's the kind of the structure in my lab, and it is all about the teamwork, and in their stage of training, they I think they have distinct requirement for the experience in the lab. And I think as a PI, my role is to orchestrate their more like naive, but more challenging, high risk idea, throwing out to already established senior postdoc level researchers. So in our lab meeting, we have a weekly lab meeting and the individual meeting. During the weekly lab meeting, we have 3 different events every week. It is like one another every week. One is journal club and journal scan and data club. So journal club, you know, just there's a pick on a good article and review. Journal scan, every individuals are assigned in the beginning of the academic year for 3 to 5 journals. So they go through the contents every month, and then they give only 5 minutes to introduce like 2-3 abstracts to the people. It doesn't really necessarily to be their own research project, but also they kind of introduce other paper if certain study is probably of interest for other lab members. And data club, it's all about troubleshootings of research experiments and then paper revision. So that is the data club. So that's how we work in the dynamic environment in various stage of the trainings in my lab. Thank you.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Edwin Mas. I'm in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders, and I co-direct the Speech, Language, and Brain Lab. My research is focused primarily on a speech disorder called apraxia of speech, which can happen both as a result of stroke, like Nadine was talking about, but there's also developmental variant. And right now in our lab, you know, a lot of what we do involves clinical trials. I'll just talk a little bit about the current staffing, and I'll try to move on from there. But basically what we're trying to do is test whether a treatment for apraxia speech works. And this is speech therapy. So this is funded by an R01. So we have one full-time project manager to help manage the day-to-day and, you know, manage data, supervise and wrangle people and so on, do recruitment as well. We also have a full-time PhD student. She's actually doing her project funded also by NIH, sort of on a project related to our ongoing clinical trial, looking at predictive factors for treatment response. But she's also a speech language pathologist that helps supervise our actual clinicians. She's not delivering the treatment, but she's supervising those. So we have, for this summer, for example, we run this as a summer camp. We have 6 master's students in our speech language pathology program who will be doing the assessments and will be delivering the speech therapy under supervision by licensed speech language pathologists. And what's nice about this is that this counts for them as an external clinical placement. They get extensive experience with this population doing treatment, but it's also part of research. So it's nice for them because they get a really in-depth experience, you know, with this particular population. And it's nice for us because it means we don't have to pay them, which sounds terrible, but it means like for them, it's an educational experience. And so it's a way for us to make the budget work, frankly. There's also scientific benefits, which I won't go into right now, but so we also have a speech language pathologist who's a part-time research assistant, and she helps with planning and organizing the summer camp activities and leads those. She helps with developing a clinical diagnosis system. So, you know, so she has relevant experience for that. We have a whole bunch of undergraduate student volunteers in the lab. Right now we have about 12, and they work on a variety of projects, including the funded projects, but also unfunded projects. And sometimes they have projects of their own, like if they're funded through a Diamond Scholars, Diamond Diamond Program, Diamond Research Scholarship or something. We occasionally have master students who are involved in the lab who do a thesis. But they're kind of on their own, like, they're sort of like not necessarily part of the research staff. We have another fairly large clinical trial starting to come online once we can do in-person research again, for which we'll be hiring another project manager to manage that project, another SLP to deliver that treatment. We'll have, some data analysts that we will need to hire on a sort of part-time basis. And for our summer camp, we will also be looking to hire some camp counselors as well as data collectors, because we need blinded data collectors who cannot interact, with the clinicians and so on. Like, they have to be separate. So I think that's the brief rundown. I want to end it here. I'm happy to entertain questions, but I want to make sure that we leave time for Beth and for your questions. And because Beth has an awesome graph that she may show you, so I'll leave it there.
Hi, everybody. I should probably give some context to that comment. I needed a graphic to help me guide through today. I'm dependent on PowerPoint, unfortunately, so I have a little bit of an addiction I need to work through. But my name is Beth Pfeiffer. I am the director of the REACH Lab, and what that stands for is essentially research engagement and advocacy for community participation in health. So all of our outcomes in the lab are really focused on community participation. Outcomes for transitional age youth with autism or intellectual and developmental disabilities, who are young adults or transitioning into adulthood. So most of our work really is focused on those types of transitional outcomes that are going to be most meaningful to that group. And that might be employment. Transportation is a really big focus for us. We have a heavy emphasis on engagement of stakeholder involvement in our projects. And you can see in our staffing, we actually hire people that are able to represent our groups and our targeted population. So that's a real big focus for us as well. I mostly, across the board, most of my hired staff people are staff members. And what I found is right now we have about 5 to 6 funded studies that we're staffing and that we're implementing currently. And because of that, it made the most sense to have staff that go across a couple different projects. So we have 4 full-time staff members, we have 1 part-time staff members, and then we have about 15 to 20 students that come through the lab a year in terms of in volunteer types of positions. And so they're involved in different studies across the different funded studies, as well as pilot projects that we have, or maybe they're interested in a topic that's related and we support them in that process. So that's typically how it works. I used some different terms here, but we have a research coordinator, which is essentially our project manager, that goes across the board. And she's also a PhD student. That's a recent development this past year. One of the things I'm really committed to with our staff in the lab are that we're developing their research skills and we're advancing, even though they're full-time staff members, we're still advancing them in terms of science and their future professional trajectory. About 50% of our staff go on for higher degrees. 2 of them right now have master's degrees. 1 is going to go for master's degrees. 2 of them are going to go for PhDs. And the other one is, she's happy where she's at right now. So, but she's getting that experience that she wants to kind of develop a career in this area. So we're really committed to professional development for our staff as well. They do go across projects, so they're involved in a number of different studies. But one of the things I really look for is to kind of fill a gap. We work very closely as a team. So I would say we are in meetings probably 6 times a week together for different projects. And then we have 2 meetings that are just with our staff. So to talk about, where we need to go next, what needs to be done, and so on, to organize that process and for the different projects. So we really do function as a team. And with that, we have different strengths that we bring. I feel like right now I'm really fortunate. I feel like I have a team of people that we build on each other's strengths and we each bring something to the table that's needed in that process. And so our research coordinator does a lot of work with the IRB. So she'll work across all the different projects with the IRB, yet she also works with other staff members to understand how the IRB works and what an IRB submission might look like. We have another member who's our organizational SAR, maybe. I don't know what else to call her. She keeps us all in line, showing up at the right time, gets all our materials needed for, gift cards or incentives, and she keeps us all on track. We have another person who's just a really excellent writer. And so she'll help us with a lot with the dissemination process. And she's a really good conceptual thinker. So we have that. And then we have a full-time peer support interventionist. This person is assigned to certain projects because we do peer interventionist studies. Our studies are essentially intervention efficacy and their assessment development for clinical research. And I'm an occupational therapist by discipline, but our research is with that transitional youth group. So the peer support specialist is able to really represent some of the targeted population that we were trying to, engage in science. And so, so he has brought in a whole new perspective to us about what are priorities, what is important that we need to think about in that process. And so we share him with another agency as well. So he's also out in the field, not just in the area of science. And the roles really have spanned for many of our staff members, just across doing some of the real science aspect things, data collection, recruitment, to being able to support writing and grants and manuscripts. So there's a lot of different responsibilities. We also have a part-time research assistant. This was a person that was a volunteer in the lab a couple of years ago, and now she's kind of transitioned, and she's balancing a couple different things in her own life. She's graduated, but she was an undergrad student, and then she came back to work with us part-time. So we do actively engage a number of students in the research lab. We have master's level students who are, involved in their coursework for occupational therapy, and they're really interested in some of the projects we're doing, or they're interested in getting mentorship in an area that might be related. And so we support those students. We have some undergraduates that come through. Many of them are interested in possibly pursuing OT as a career, and they're interested in the research and science aspect of that as well. And so they want to come and do some volunteer work with different projects. We also sometimes I get psych undergrad interns too. So this is part of their coursework. They need to do a certain amount of time as an intern, and they'll come into the lab and do some work with us as well. So we have a pretty big mix, but I think I would say our staffing structure really is staff, hired full-time staff or part-time staff. I had the opportunity to grow this over time. I started with just one part-time staff member. And then as our projects grew and the work grew and the funding grew, as many people have said before too, you have to have funding to be able to hire staff. So I was fortunate enough to build that funding and be able to bring on more staff, and then kind of transition the part-time folks into the full-time folks. And that might be the best way if you're starting out in that process. I found that really helpful to start and being able to kind of build on that structure from part-time to full-time. I think that's all I have. I think that at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Carol, who's going to facilitate some questions. And
yeah, thank you all. That was great. I have questions here, and I've also been taking notes, and I have some questions as well. So I'm just going to start at the top. So June, this looks like this one is directed for you. Does a lab of trainees work better than others, since you have a large bench lab component compared to having lots of human subjects?
Yeah, I think I think that is one reason that I have more of trainees than a professional researcher. Actually, although we are primarily doing the mouse and cell culture studies, and we are not really recruiting human subjects as much as other researchers at Temple do in our college. Actually, for human study, going back to my trainee time about 20 years ago when I was doctoral students, Actually, it was a highly human studies with exercise training and genetics. Actually, there were more doctoral students, depending on what type of human subjects you're looking for. If they need clinical cares, probably professional individual will be better. But depending on their severity of pathological conditions and what kind of intervention you're trying to do in your particular research projects, I think the doctoral students in the past experience of human study, we had 25 doctoral and master's degree students, and there were only 3 study coordinators and other the staff members. So I think it's depending on what type of human study you require more trainees versus researcher. That's, I don't know if that answers to that question.
Thank you. How, and I guess this would go out to any or all of the panelists. How do you structure meetings when you have staff at multiple levels? For instance, do you meet with each undergraduate individually, or do some people mainly have meetings with you during a larger group lab meeting?
I have both. I have individual meeting for each individual undergraduate through staff member once a week. Only sometimes like 10 minutes or 30 minutes. For the doctoral student, when they are close dissertation, it goes about 1 hour. But I do have individual meetings for each one of the members, staff members and the students, and also having a group meeting once a week. That's all together. They can share their idea. They kind of know what others do and how they can get involved to learn and observing, especially for undergraduates and early stage of graduate students. So that's how I'm running the lab with the multi-level staffing.
Great, thanks. Anyone else on that question? How you structure meetings?
So we have lab meetings once a week, and then they include primarily the staff members, not the volunteers, because we can't coordinate the time. Well, even with Zoom meetings, we can't coordinate everybody to attend, but we do try to engage the students in smaller meetings. Again, the staff members supervise them on specific projects so that they contribute that way. But our staff meetings are once a week, and then we have little individuals meeting on different projects, especially now more than ever with Zoom. You know, we add all these meetings. And then of course the postdocs and pre-docs, as Shun said, you're meeting with them. I meet with them once a week at least, and then as needed. So that's how we structure it with the undergrad volunteers.
Great.
They don't participate directly in the staff meetings typically, special occasions.
We run it very similarly too. We have team meetings. I think I need to learn a lesson in how to reduce my meeting time. We meet at least 3 times a week with our team meetings, but we have a lot of projects running right now. And I think that's part of it, is that because there's like 5 or 6 funded projects we're trying to move forward in the world of COVID, it takes more to meet and get together and make that happen and overcome barriers and so on. So we meet quite a bit in our team, and we bring in, depending on the students that are involved, we bring them in during the meeting when we're talking about that particular project or that topic. And so we'll bring them into that situation. There are times, depending on if there might be a pilot study that they're working on or a project on their own, then I'll meet with them separately. And definitely, I don't have as many PhD students in my lab, and part of that's just by the nature of the way our department's structured, and we don't have a PhD that I connect with. So my PhD students are actually in public health or social behavior sciences that, my staff are in those programs. And so I still do meet with them for mentoring as well, maybe twice a month individually.
Yeah, I guess I'll just briefly add on to that. So I don't usually meet with undergraduate students individually on a regular basis, but only on an as needed basis, except when they have like their own project, like if they're funded through Diamond Research Scholarship or something, then yes, I will meet them individually. So I try to have, try to minimize my meetings as well. But as Nadine said, scheduling often is a problem. So we end up having some evening meetings for some aspects of the team, like planning our summer camp, like that's only a staff meeting. But then, we also have to have different group meetings because again, like our data analysts have to be blinded. So they cannot have any contact with the people who, let's say, do treatment fidelity. Like we can't have those people in the same meetings because that will unblind the data analysts to what they worked on in speech therapy. So there's some scientific reasons to have completely walled off group meetings essentially, but it's also schedule driven. So, I usually end up having like 3 different group meetings, about different projects and different elements of a project that we need to have at separate times, which gets a little cumbersome, but sometimes that is the only way to go.
Great. When you interview undergrads for RA or lab coordinator positions, how do you decide who to hire? Many of them have very little research experience. Anyone?
Sure.
Well, we have an application process over the years. I'm sorry, were you starting to talk, Edwin? I apologize. But yeah, so we get so many applicants now that we have them fill out a form, which, why are you interested? We ask for, I think we ask for grade point averages or specific courses. What's your major? Why do you want to do this? And we interview them before they come on board. And how do we choose? We try to choose as many as possible, but we have sent a few on their way saying, maybe you're not, for this. We try to do it nicely because they're enthusiastic, but many of them are looking for lab experience anywhere. So we haven't hurt too many feelings, but we take on, like Beth, like 11 or 12 a semester or year. And we do try to choose people that are sophomores or juniors, so that they'll be with us for a while if they decide to stay on, and that helps. I think we've set a policy against people that are just in their last semester of a university experience, so of their undergraduate degree, because there's just too much of, by the time they ramp up on what they're to be doing, then they're graduating. So that makes sense. So that's how we do it. And we just are selective. We're more selective than we used to be out of experience. You need someone to monitor. We need someone that works hard. And again, most of them want to work hard, so it's hard to say no to any of them.
So I'd like to just pick up because, I'd like to maybe add a comment. I agree with everything Nadine is saying, but I think when you're looking for like a lab coordinator, that's to me a little different than undergrad volunteers. And so for that, I think I do look for research experience. Like they have to have some research experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be in our field, but that is strongly preferred, of course. But organizational skills are key. Like we amass a vast amount of data that needs to be organized. We have people that need to be managed as well and supervised. So, someone who's organized is really, really key because they can learn stuff. Like they can learn things. For us, they need to have some background in speech and language, like some fundamental understanding of disorders in our case, but they don't necessarily need to have all the technical skills. Like they can learn how to do some acoustic analyses, for example. And then the final thing I think is really key is interpersonal skills. We work with families, for example, and so when we do recruitment, like we need to have someone who has a certain level of maturity, empathy, and sensitivity that I feel comfortable will be able to have a conversation with a parent who calls us for research, and maybe their child doesn't qualify, and that can be a very emotionally difficult conversation to have. Mm-hmm. So we need someone who's going to be sensitive to that. So those things are more important, but some research experience is absolutely required in my mind.
Yeah, I think just chime in a little. Just one more of my experience is that undergrad students who is approaching to faculty members for potential opportunity being involved in research, they're already motivated in my experience. So I think, and actually the one thing is, it is very tough that, know who they are and, how they are organized in the 15-minute interview. But actually the other side is that students, I don't promise them for entire academic year. I'm just promise them for, okay, so I have a position for this semester, so you can just come into play, what you can do. And actually I just, have a person involved for a semester. And, as long as my experience so far was fantastic, as long as they are smart enough, nice enough, and get together with others well, I think they're all good to go.
That actually, I'm just going to interject that it sounds like one of the appeals perhaps of hiring students versus regular employees can be that you can make the commitment to the person you're hiring doesn't need to be as long. With a regular employee, it's implied longer term. And if you're first getting to know someone, it sounds like you might be able to get to know how they work before you make a longer commitment. Here's another question. Can you elaborate on the differences between the RA and the project manager? What do you consider to be the differences in the competencies for each?
I know, Nadine, I don't know if you want to take this one. I'm wondering if we define that the same way, because I know we both talked about that.
Well, yeah, the lab manager, project manager, they're very similar. The research assistants, there is a difference. The project managers oversee the research assistants, but the research assistants oversee whatever they're working on and the students that are working on it, the project manager does more communication in my lab, for example. Like if we're like right now, we've been looking for publishers for a test or something, and so the project manager will be the one to craft those emails, and I will look them over, and we will send them out, and then we'll both work on we'll talk to the publishers together, but they take more initiative, I think, than the research assistants. So it's not that the research assistants do just what you tell them; they take some initiative, but by the time you're a project manager, you're relieving some of the duties that we do. So they do the IRB, for example, they help out with that. Of course, I'm working with them on that, but eventually they know it better than I do. As you know, the IRB changes a little bit, like all the time. So you have to keep up with that. So yeah, I don't know if that helps or not, but that's one of the differences, yeah, that I see. Beth?
I would say the same exact thing for our lab, exactly the same. That person kind of is, I want to say, the person that's working directly with me, and they're really coordinating a lot of factors across all the different projects and the research staff, and they might supervise like our peer interventionists. So they're doing a lot, and that person comes in with a lot more experience. So when they're hired, I looked for somebody who had experience as a research associate or in research positions in the past. They know research, they worked in this area. So this is somebody that has the skills to be able to do some of those things.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to the next question, unless there's other, whatever, interrupt me if you had more to say on this. But the next one is, Beth mentioned her staff is cross-project. Are there any disadvantages to cross-project structure versus project-specific assignments? What do other panelists do with regard to this?
This is a great question. I'll just present why I do it this way and what has worked for us. And then I'd be really interested in hearing what everybody else has to say. This works for us because of the multiple project and because of my staff structure. So everybody is full-time except for one or two people that are part-time. And because of that, we're always together. We always know what's going on with one another, and it just makes sense. So if one person is getting really busy on this project, there's another person to pick up the pieces. They also might serve different roles, but support each other. For example, recruitment and IRB versus data collection and data management on the same project. So So we found this has been a real benefit. If somebody can't, we have, along with our research team meetings, we have a lot of our projects are multi-site. So we have a lot of meetings during the week, multi-site meetings with, people in Colorado or California, whatever, wherever they're at. And so these folks attend all of those meetings as well. And if somebody can't attend, the other person picks up the pieces. So it's worked out extremely well for us. And it actually has saved us because of, let's say somebody gets sick or maternity, all these different factors come up. It's really, really worked out well. I could certainly see that there might be in other situations where staffing is structured a little bit differently that might not work as well.
So I'll just quickly say that the lab meetings that we have once a week are where people are reporting the projects they're leading. So, and then we have individual meetings with those people, but there is cross-pollination for sure, because you don't have that many people that you could really have silos for each one and just reporting. So people are necessarily involved in several projects, but in different capacities, for example. So someone might be helping to test patients for one project, but they're taking the lead on another project. And it works out really well. And we do know to some degree what each other are doing. And we read papers at lab meetings as well. We spend a little bit of time doing that so that people are learning further. For a time, we were not just reporting in 10 minutes what we're doing currently, but we would actually give little presentations about the particular project that someone was working on. They would present what they were doing. And we keep that up. When we get busy, we don't do it as much, but it comes and goes. So I think that model works out really well.
Yeah, I guess just to add on to that, to throw a potential wrinkle into that, I like the idea, and it's nice if that works out. It gets a little tricky with funding sometimes. If you have someone hired for, full time on this one grant, then really they can't be doing any work on another grant. So then you have to sort of see how much time you really need them to work on this project versus another. Like even if they're full time, and they're funded from different sources, then that might be that they can only work 3 days on this project and only 2 days on that project. But Carol can probably tell you more about the complexities there.
Yeah, actually, one of the things I was going to ask, and this might be a good segue, is if any of you or all of you would like to talk a little bit about use of your startup funds versus use of a grant fund to pay for lab support, lab staffing. Relative advantages, disadvantages.
So I can speak to that. I'm not using startup funds currently, but it certainly was something that was very helpful to get the lab up and running and kind of things move forward so we could get additional funding. So sometimes that's really necessary for pilot work. And I think that's where startup funds to hire somebody part-time or full-time or whatever you can afford with those is really important. So that was important for me early on. I also kind of look at those funds if I couldn't even tell you what's in them right now, but I look at that as a backup, because if a funding project drops and I have a full-time staff member and I know that there's potential for another one to come in, I almost look at that as like bridge funding for staff as well. That can be really important to keep somebody on and working and moving the lab work forward.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. I think once you have people working in your lab, you're responsible for them, right? Like, and if you have a funding gap, you need to ideally find a way to keep them employed and so they can eat and so on. So the startup funds is a good potential bridge fund. So I think I used my startup in part to have a lab manager to kind of help my lab set up and so on. But that's the kind of thing that, as soon as you have a grant, you can move people over to that, because that is an allowable expense on a grant. But there are certain things that you cannot use grant funds for that you can use startup funds for. Like, for example, a silly example, if you want a couch in your lab, you can't put that on a grant. But, with your permission from your associate dean for research and so on, you might be able to do that with startup funds. So there's filing cabinets, like silly things like that, right? Startup funds can be used for more things than grant funds, and personnel is like salary costs is like, as soon as you can move that to a grant, move to a grant is my advice.
Yeah, if there's a choice of using grant account versus startup account, I would definitely go with the research grants account to support the stipend for research staff. But on the other hand, startup is very important. For example, for the type of work that my lab is doing, is kind of they have spent years to acquire certain levels of research skills like analysis or using machines, handling and intervention for animal models. So the startup account is definitely a need. I would use stable money if there's available in that bridging time period to make this continuum in my research program. So yeah, so if there's a choice, I would go with research grant. But if there's no choice, definitely startup is going to be the important resource to continue staffing of my lab.
I think we're almost running out of time, but I just wanted to echo that supporting your staff is one of the most important things and most stressful things as you move along. As Edwin was saying, I mean, it's a job to them, so keeping your research grants up there is important. And I haven't never had to use support funds because, well, but right now, for me, that safety net is the 16 account that I get. Have funds from return of indirects, and I save those. I use them. I use most of the staffing. The grants themselves go to staffing, and then I use the 16 account for travel and things like that. But I try to keep a stash because I have had to go through really low funding points and keep people on, and it's hard. It's very hard. So you have to be prepared for that. If you're planning on a long-term research career, you have to be prepared for that.
Do we have time for any more questions or any other questions from the attendees? Are we? Oh, you answered some questions, and Edwin answered some questions in typed answers. Okay. I actually did have a question. It's related to funding, and if it's okay that we go over a couple of minutes, maybe. Is that okay? I know all of you have had staff in your lab that are either partially or fully paid for by their own external funding source. So not on your grant and not on your 14 account. I know there's an F31. There was someone, I think a postdoc had gotten an R21 for a short period. There's somebody that is paid sort of shared with another organization, and then a postdoctoral fellow with I believe it's a grant or a fellowship, just fellowship grant just for his support. I'm curious how those happened. Do you want to talk a little bit about how those happened and how that just, or maybe just put out there that it's a possibility?
Sure. Since Nadine and I both have to go to a faculty meeting, I'll take the privilege of going first here. So I have a student, my PhD student has an F31 from NIH to do her research. How that happens is by being an awesome student and a lot of advising. This is not something they can write on their own. It is related to our research, of course. So it requires quite a bit of involvement on the mentor's part, but it's very rewarding, and it's nice because they're full-time funded now. Like, she's full-time funded now on her own, which frees up some of my budgets to hire other people.
Yeah, and she had been working in your lab, right, before that, before she had the F31?
Yes, yeah, they can't accept an F31 until they are advanced to candidacy anyway, so it's no point writing it in first year.
Got it, okay.
In the case of the person in my lab who was a postdoc, she did apply for the F31 and went through the whole process, and got an almost scoreable score, and then in the second round went down. That happens. It's horrible, but we decided to work together on the R21 for her, which is because she was almost ready to go on to a university position anyway, and it was the same work pretty much, but done in a different way. And so that was, she got funded and was with us for a short time before she went on to another university in her first academic position. So that's just how that happened. The F-31s are tough. And they treat them, the reviewers, I review them, so the reviewers treat them like the science like regular grants in a way. I mean, so they're just tough, but they're also evaluated on the mentors, and there's so many different levels. And but they're great if you can get them, and we should keep trying to get them. I'm not discouraging that, but I mean, again, we went to this R21 because she wanted to do the work. So.
Okay.
Well, we've been very fortunate as a college that the number of F-31s we've been able to secure has actually increased in the last several years. And I know that we have not only several that are going in, but a couple that are very close to being funded right now. So I'm actually very encouraged. And I think that I would love to see over time that our doctoral students across departments within the college, that this just becomes part of what our doctoral students do, that they get to the second half of their time with us and it's baked into the DNA that the expectation is that you're going to write an F-31 in part so you can come out of your experience as well-trained as an investigator as possible. I think it's almost impossible to overstate how impressive something like that will look on an application for a faculty position, that you were able to secure federal funding as a doctoral student. So I would encourage all of us as faculty to continue to nudge our students. And I know that Carol and Risa do a really nice job in the grant writing class of positioning our students for success in that area. So I know we're out of time and several of our panelists have to move on to faculty meetings, but I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Carol, obviously, for moderating our session today. As I said in the beginning, I think it's always wonderful that when we can hear from our faculty across our departments, learn from one another, get a chance to see one another a little bit. And just as a reminder, we're going to meet again next week. Laura Vasallo and I, Laura is also from the Office of Research Administration, are going to lead a session where we're going to focus on strengthening biosketches and making sure that our biosketches are as well polished as they should be, just from both a compliance as well as a grantsmanship perspective. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about some pros and cons with budget justifications, and have this be an opportunity that, again, we can learn from one another about strategies that work and that have not worked in terms of producing the most efficient and effective budget justifications. So until then, enjoy the sunshine this weekend, and the early weather that's supposed to be coming, or the good weather is supposed to be coming early next week. And we look forward to seeing you next Friday. Take care, everyone.